Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am BorderWise and welcome back to From the Depths. Specifically, another Armour tutorial. Because the Armour 101 tutorial I uploaded, when was it? A week or 3 ago? There needs to be some follow-up to that, because as tends to be the case in From the Depths, some detail was sacrificed for the sake of brevity. And yes, I know that video was... how long was it? It was like almost an hour long. Yeah, that is brief by From the Depths standards. And as it turns out, Armour in From the Depths is a fantastically complicated subject, which is why there's going to be a whole bunch of separate, shorter videos on individual Armour mechanics, or just elaborations on things I touched on in the Armour 101 video. Which you have not watched, you probably should, because that lays out the basics of armoring in From the Depths, and there is going to be a link in the description down below, or assuming YouTube doesn't move the description box somewhere else, as they sometimes do. But anyway, so, one thing that I did cover in the Armour 101 is the kinetic damage reduction of sloped blocks. So, just as a very quick refresher, basically, when blocks are hit at an angle, they, can you please, thank you, they take reduced damage from kinetic projectiles, so that's things like APS shells, cram shells, the shells from simple weapons, fragmentation, which comes from a variety of sources, and all that stuff. And to demonstrate that, we've got our shell here, which is 250 millimeters, 848 kinetic damage, and an armor piercing value of 39.1, so does just shy of full damage to a metal beam with nothing behind it. And this is a pretty wussy kinetic shell, as kinetic shells go, but it's great for demonstration purposes because it doesn't destroy many things in one shot, so you can actually see the damage numbers that pop up in the top right corner. So you're going to have to keep an eye up here on the top right corner to see damage numbers. So, to start off with, we are firing this at just a 1 by 1 by 1 cube of heavy armor. And when we fire, the result is 553 damage. So that is not a hell of a lot of damage. Didn't destroy this thing completely, because heavy armor is quite tough. It took it almost to half health. And just for comparison, here you have the slope. And this is covered in way more detail in my Armour 101, I hasten to mention again, and bang, 390, reduced damage because this is a 45-degree angle. And angled armor, as all the tank nerds in the audience will probably happily tell you, causes shots to glance off and not penetrate as well, so that goes kind of ping off into space, assuming it ricochets. And one thing I did not mention in Armour 101 is that counts for basically any kind of sloped block. So that applies to wedges, that applies to these square slopey things, inverted corners, and poles. So remembering the damage numbers that just happened, over here, slightly less damage, 542 damage to this wee pole here. Because the sides of pole blocks is technically a slope. It's a very shallow slope, which is why it didn't reduce the damage as much as just a slope block does. But it does do it, and should mention quickly that it is the slope that's doing that, because when you fire at it flat, it's 553 damage, the same damage that would be done as just a regular heavy armor cube. So that's good to know. It's just a whole bunch of different sloped blocks in the game, and they all work in that same mechanic. And on a similar note, you can do the same thing. Well, partially it happens naturally. So if you have, let's do this for instance. Wait, no, let's do this. And here is the damage that happens in a 4-meter beam. It should be 553. 553. This also happens with hitting anything at an angle, like any kind of block. So if I set this to 10 degrees, remembering that it does 553 damage, this is also going to benefit from armor stacking a little bit. So go here. It should be less than... Whoopsie daisy, did that work? It did work. 544, so reduced damage. Sorry, I'll do that again, because we didn't see the damn gunfire. So... there, and... ping! 544, so... slightly reduced damage, and the steeper the angle is, the less damage gets done. So let's turn that to 20 degrees. Let's turn that to 30 degrees. Idle angles are very good for testing. So... 422 damage. So, this applies to any block with just... when shells come in at an angle, the kinetic damage is reduced. And there's a fun way of accomplishing that with spin blocks that people were so kind to remind me of. Because the disadvantage of using slopes for armor is that they have less health than beams do. So here you got a 4 meter long heavy armor slope. It's got a health of 3,000, which is half the health of a heavy armor beam, just a regular one. So... this thing can only take about half as much damage total before it gets destroyed, rather in contrast to the beam, which can take a lot more. So it's actually better, when possible, to angle full beams rather than using slopes. Trouble is, that's often quite difficult, and this is where, if you are very cheeky and don't mind some of the drawbacks, which I will probably have to hastily mention later, you can use spin blocks. So here we have this thing, and just to show you that there's no actual, that putting it on a spin block doesn't actually change anything with regard to its physical properties, we're going to fire this gun again. So go test here, and bang, there's that number again, 553, and we're just going to do this quickly and repair all. Such a handy tool. I'm so glad people told me about that. Sorry, I don't remember who told me that. So now we're going to set that to 25 degrees, or minus 25 degrees, actually. So now, where's that gun aiming at? It's aiming slightly weirdly. Let's set that to 45 degrees, actually. So now this should be going... it's gonna hit... it's set that to 35, so it catches it right there on the low. So remember, 553, that's the usual number. When we angle it like that, 452. So that goes to show you that spin blocks can actually be used to make, to use full blocks as sloped armor. But it bears mentioning that there is a risk in doing that, and it is a little bit cheesy, in that this heavy armor block has a health of 1,250 and an armor of 60. The spin block it's mounted on has only 800 health and 15 armor, so this is a huge weak point, particularly if you have a whole bunch of blocks mounted on it. This is the usual weakness with spin blocks and turrets and just sub-objects in general. Because if this gets destroyed, it just takes a whole bunch of your armor with it, which is why it's a bit of a risk. And when you get things that are good at penetrating, like heat and hash, or just straight up kinetic penetrators, yeah, it's a huge risk. I wouldn't recommend doing that. It is just occasionally handy in case you've got a particular part of your craft that tends to eat a lot of fire from kinetics. So yeah. And speaking of block orientation, one of the things that people have asked me is, like, in what way do you slope your armor? Well, not slope, sorry. In what way do you orientate your beams for armor? So what is meant by that is, do you orientate them towards incoming fire, so pointing at them lengthways, like this, or do you have them flat, like this? And this is an easy question to answer. You have them flat. And the reason for that is, I will demonstrate right now with juicy, squishy stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4. And like here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to have a 4x4, well, not quite 4x4, a 4 meter thick blob of stuff here. So this is exactly the same area, regardless of how it's orientated, and you might think, okay, it's 4 meters thick, that should be a-okay, except because it's got blocks that are reaching so far inward like this, it's got a bit of a problem whenever you're dealing with something that can destroy one of these beams in one shot. And so now we have a 500mm sabot shell that does 1000 more damage than metal beams have health, and almost full damage, so can quite happily destroy a metal beam in one shot, and this is what happens. And disable, repair, thank you. Well, that did kind of help. Let's do that again so we can play with the hull. Don't take that out of context, please. So here you see the problem with orientating your beams this way, is that when they get destroyed, suddenly there's a clear window straight into your squishy bits, and any kind of penetrating shell, or just weapon full stop. So particle cannons and lasers can also do things like this, or just a tightly angled frag on missiles, APS, and cram cannons. They can also do similar things to this. As if they destroy this one beam, suddenly they can reach all the way in, deep inside your craft, and that's very, very bad news, because it means you get your squishy bits destroyed. So, orientating these blocks in a slightly different way, so this is still 4 meters thick, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, probably is very sensible, because even if something can destroy a beam in one shot, it gets stopped. So it's destroyed one beam, it's this much longer, shallower wound, it's damaged the beam there, but still the armor as a whole is roughly intact. There's no passageway into the squishy innards, and you'll notice that these squishy innards are intact. They have not been turned into a donut. So lining them up flat is by far the better way to do it. Like, there's almost no reason to orientate your blocks like this, unless there's a particular shape you're going for. But yeah, so that is the most important way to orientate your blocks. And now we go to the slightly more complicated version. So, with regards to that, so we've ascertained that you orientate them flat, but in what way flat? So, if the fire's coming from over there, do you do it horizontally, do you do it vertically, or do you do a crosshatch pattern like this? Well, the short answer is it doesn't actually matter that much. It's far more important to get them orientated flat and get your layering and choice of material right, rather than anything else. There are very slight benefits to arranging them in different ways like this. Horizontal beams, they work perfectly fine. I've had ships that do just fine with armor beams layered like this. And vertical beams tend to be... also, it works just fine. Back in the day, just as a side note, when armor stacking used to go up to 8 meters thick, vertical beams were inherently superior against any kind of shot coming in at anything other than a 90-degree angle, because it just... each block stacked with itself more, which means that the thicker this was, you actually got better armor stacking than you would for horizontal beams. So, if we travel through here, it's like, you know, it effectively has more blocks backing each other up than horizontal beams do. So it's like... it's a very, very subtle difference, I should mention. So, go here, and it's just like coming through 45 degrees. It goes like that, as opposed to 2. But yeah, it's like, the main thing to talk about, really, is cross-hatching and whether that's worth doing. And the answer to that is kind of yes and no. I usually do not bother with it because it has exactly one pro and then basically one con to it. So, if we delete our squishy bits here for a moment, and if we delete this, and if we simulate a 2 meter thick metal wall with one block already destroyed. Say a kinetic round managed to get in there and perfectly destroy it. And now we've got the second layer with a perfectly intact metal beam behind there. And we're going to turn our APS into a high explosive APS. So here we go. So now, this is where cross-hatching is potentially quite useful because of how it deals with explosive damage. So, we're not too interested in the damage numbers right now, but what we are interested in is the health of that block in the second layer. So we did about just over 1000 HE damage, and that block there is at 83% health, so almost 20% of its health was taken off by that shell. Okay, well, it's done its job. High explosive is not particularly good against anything with decent armor, but if we crosshatch, so if we do this now, so there, one, and we do something like this, you'll notice something interesting because of just how HE damage works in this game. So we go here, bang. So still same amount of HE damage is done. However, that damage has now been split over multiple blocks. So you'll see this top beam here, 97%, 97%, 97%, 93%. That's probably because that beam took the kinetic damage as well, 97%. So now you have 4 beams which are just very slightly damaged as opposed to one moderately damaged beam. So this is where cross-hatching is kind of useful, is because when HE damage, or any kind of damage that spreads out a lot, like flak or even like high-angle frag, when it comes in, it kind of like, it just is spread over multiple blocks, and thus the armor as a whole lasts longer. So instead of like 5 shots to take out the one beam there, it would take, let's see, let's do math, it would take this one, roughly 10%, instead of 5 it would take 10 shots in order to deal with it. So that's good. So that's the main pro of cross-hatching, but there is a con to it, and this is best demonstrated with kinetic rounds. So we're going to switch our friend here back to a sabot round. So handy to do this, so handy. So clear clips. So delete all this again and set it to vertical blocks, which are nice and simple. And we're going to shoot a hole in it, and you can probably guess what is going to happen now. Wait, is it full of kinetics? Yes, it is. Yes, it is indeed. There it goes, and bang! We need a stronger kinetic. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Darn kinetics. So we're just gonna go here. I'm gonna have sabot, and then we're gonna have solid warhead bodies. Just 2 of them. There we go. That'll do. That'll do. Pig, because I want to demonstrate something in particular. So we go here, and we go test, and bang! What the? Oh, you fool! You damn fool! You didn't do the thing. Did I do the thing? I don't know. I've been struggling no end with trying to record this tutorial, I gotta say. Alright, let's try that again. Let's try it again. Go here. No stuff-ups, please. Bang. Okay, so that's what I wanted to see. You'll notice that it's blown a hole straight through it. 2 metal beams, no issue. But you'll notice as well that if we have our handy armor tool, which is found in the Z menu, by the way, or Z menu, the 2 beams on either side of it still are benefiting from armor stacking. So they've got an AC of 48, which means if any other kind of Daka is coming in along with that monster kinetic shell, it's doing less damage to these 2 blocks on either side because it's got that armor stacking goodness behind it. Now, if we do the same with a crosshatch setup, so we go here, let's go, and 1, 2, and we do something like this, and we do the same thing again. You can probably see where this is going. Bang! So, easy peasy lemon squeezy, blast a hole straight through, and you might think, well, BorderWise, that's a smaller hole. That's a good thing, isn't it? Well, kind of, but remember that deeper holes are a much bigger problem than shallower holes, so the fact that this thing went straight through kind of negates the benefit of this hole being a lot smaller, especially considering that shells tend to be annoyingly good at landing in the same place over and over again, particularly fast kinetic shells. And you'll also note with our handy-dandy armor tool that, okay, armor stacking is still happening on this section of the beam, but not here. So this is the major weakness of cross-hatching, is that, yeah, it handles it just fine when it's just the first layer being destroyed and the second layer is starting to tank it against HE damage, but when the second layer gets compromised, it actually messes with the armor stacking of the beams in front of it, because it's not there anymore. So now, this 3 this area of about 3... what is it? It's like 3 by 1 square meters. Yeah, 3 square meters, actually. Durr, I can math. Is now not got any armor stacking, so that might not seem like a big issue, but a plus 8 armor adds up quite a bit. So if we go back to the AC of our thing here, that's 45. So this isn't actually quite doing full damage against 2 stacked metal beams, which have an armor combined AC of 48. So now, when this thing fires, it's doing full damage to beams in this area here, which means it's got probably enough leftover kinetic damage to punch through and absolutely ruin your day on the other side of this wall. So this is the drawback of cross-hatching, and it's why I generally don't use it, because in extended fights, as you start to get more holes punched in your armor, just the overall integrity of the armor is weakened more and more, so that's a bit of an issue, and is why I don't do that. So you're generally better off just, generally, except for HE, but high explosive is pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's pretty straightforward to defend against, because you just use blocks that have high armor, like metal, or heavy armor, or even against smaller explosions, you can use things like light alloy. And another thing to note, just one more time, is that it is also more important what kinds of beams you're using, rather than how they're orientated. So, if we have a craft, of which I've built many, so just gonna make a quarter of a canoe right here, sorry. So if it's nice and flat, so say it's 1, 2, say it's like, let's sketch it out quickly. So 1, 2, 3 meters tall, and it's got, oh, bollocks, BorderWise. So it's got slopes like this on it, and just like there's the start of our canoe thing. It is better to have as the hull horizontal 4-meter beams rather than vertical 3-meter beams, simply because even though the vertical is slightly better with regards to just it makes a narrow hole in your thing and all that stuff, or cross-hatching, I should mention, it is better to have consistently 4-meter beams like this because they get bonus health. So they've got an extra plus 20% health from their 4-meter length. So you might be tempted, like if you do cross-hatching, to do something like this. So cross-hatch 3-meter beams with 4-meter beams behind them. This has less health overall than just a 2-layer stack of 4-meter beams. And it also doesn't have that weakness that I mentioned before of the armor stacking being compromised by the second layer going. So, admittedly, if 2 layers gets broken, you've got a wide hull, but once the second layer is broken, you've got bigger problems anyway. So, hopefully that answers the questions about block orientation, and that will do for now. This is already longer than I was anticipating this would be, because, like, at the end of the day, do remember this, is that armor in From the Depths is probably one of the most complicated mechanics in this game. It's kind of simple to use once you get the hang of it, but explaining it and articulating it is somewhat difficult, so bear with me, please. But yeah, so slopes and block orientation, I hope you have found this helpful, and if you already knew all this stuff, I hope you found it entertaining, watching me fumble around with my own fortress. And thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Support me on Patreon or YouTube membership if you like. It really helps. There's fun perks and stuff. And thank you to all my current supporters, and I will see you next time in From the Depths. Farewell.